Somewhere in a classified operations room, location undisclosed, a target list exists. It has coordinates, it has timelines, and according to sources with direct knowledge of internal U.S. deliberations, it may already have an authorization window. The U.S. president has said it publicly, almost calmly. He is considering a limited military strike on Iran, not a declaration of war, not an ultimatum shouted from a podium. A quiet, deliberate statement of the kind that military planners and foreign intelligence agencies treat as a green light to start the clock. And the clock right now is ticking. Here's what makes this moment different from every other U.S.-Iran standoff of the past 2 decades. The military options are not theoretical. Naval assets are already deployed. Strike packages are already drawn up. And the targets, 3 of them in particular, sit inside Iranian soil right now. Some buried under hundreds of feet of reinforced concrete, some already showing signs, visible from satellite, that Iran knows exactly what's coming. 10 to 15 days. That's the negotiation window being floated. After that, the calculus changes. But here's the detail that no headline is giving you enough space to understand. A limited strike in this context is not a warning shot. It's a precise, multi-platform military operation designed to accomplish specific objectives and potentially trigger a chain of events that could reshape the entire Middle East within 72 hours. What are the actual targets? What does a limited strike really mean in operational terms? And why are senior U.S. officials already calculating the retaliation, not asking if it will happen, but planning for when? That's what this breakdown is about. Before this is over, you'll understand why one of these targets was already struck in 2025 and why U.S. planners chose to put it back on the list anyway. That decision tells you everything. To understand what a U.S. strike on Iran would actually look like, you need to understand the landscape. Not the political one, but the physical and strategic one that military planners are working from right now. Iran's nuclear program is not centralized. It was deliberately designed that way, dispersed across multiple sites, some above ground, some buried so deep that only a specific class of munitions can reach them. The 3 sites at the center of current targeting discussions are Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. Natanz is Iran's primary uranium enrichment facility. It sits in the Isfahan province, partially underground, and houses thousands of centrifuges spinning uranium hexafluoride gas into progressively higher concentrations of enriched uranium. It has been struck before by the Stuxnet cyber attack, by sabotage operations, and most recently in 2025, it keeps reconstituting. That resilience is exactly why it remains at the top of the target list. Fordow is different and more difficult. Built inside a mountain near the city of Qom, it was designed specifically to be impervious to airstrikes. Its depth and rock cover make it resistant to most conventional munitions. The U.S. military's answer to Fordow is the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb that can only be delivered by a B-2 stealth bomber. The fact that B-2s are part of current force posture discussions is not coincidental. Isfahan houses nuclear research and conversion facilities, the processing hub where uranium ore gets converted into the gas that feeds Natanz's centrifuges. Disrupt all 3 in coordinated sequence, and you set Iran's program back significantly. You don't eliminate it, but you delay it, potentially by years. Now here's the layer that changes the risk calculation entirely. Iran has been watching. Satellite imagery analyzed by independent researchers in recent weeks shows accelerated construction activity around these sites, reinforced tunnel entrances, additional concrete shielding, what appear to be deliberate concealment efforts around key access points. Iran is not waiting to see if a strike comes. Iran is hardening against it. That detail, Iran actively preparing its nuclear sites for incoming strikes, is the piece of context that reframes everything about the situation. Because hardening a site isn't just defensive, it's a signal. It tells Washington that Tehran has assessed the threat as credible, and it tells military planners that the window to act effectively is narrowing. You now know what the targets are, but the targets are only half the plan. The other half, the part that determines whether this stays limited, is what happens in the first hour after the strike lands. A limited strike sounds by definition contained. The word limited does a lot of rhetorical work in diplomatic and military communications. It signals restraint, proportionality, a hand extended even as the fist is cocked. But in operational terms, what U.S. planners are actually describing is a multi-domain, high-precision military campaign compressed into a 24 to 72-hour window. Here's what that looks like in practice. It likely begins not with bombs, but with electrons. Cyber and electronic warfare operations, disabling radar systems, jamming communications networks, potentially corrupting command and control infrastructure across IRGC installations. The goal is to blind Iran's military in the first minutes, creating a gap through which kinetic strikes can flow without triggering the full air defense response. Then come the Tomahawk cruise missiles, launched from naval vessels already positioned in the Gulf and potentially the eastern Mediterranean. Tomahawks are subsonic but GPS guided to within meters of their targets. They can be programmed to arrive simultaneously across multiple sites, denying Iran the ability to respond to one strike before the next is already inbound. Simultaneously, stealth aircraft, most likely B-2 Spirit bombers carrying bunker-penetrating munitions, handle the hardened targets. Fordow specifically requires this capability. No other platform in the U.S. inventory can credibly threaten a facility at that depth. The entire kinetic phase, according to analysts familiar with U.S. strike planning doctrine, could be complete within 48 hours. Clean, targeted, and, in the military's framing, proportionate. But here is the complication that no limited strike framing can paper over. Iran has already decided how it will respond, and the response will not be limited. U.S. officials, according to multiple reports, are not debating whether Iran retaliates. They're wargaming the specific forms that retaliation will take. Iran's primary retaliation options in order of likelihood are missile and drone strikes on U.S. military installations across the Gulf. Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE all host significant American assets. Disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, and activation of proxy networks across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon's Hezbollah, the Houthis, various Iranian-aligned militia groups, to strike U.S. and allied interests on multiple fronts simultaneously. This is not speculation. This is Iran's established playbook, updated and rehearsed after every previous U.S.-Iran escalation cycle. Reports indicate that U.S. strike planning includes, as a high-risk option, targeting specific IRGC commanders, not just facilities, not just infrastructure, individual military leaders in the manner of the January 2020 strike that killed Qasem Soleimani. That option is described internally as highly escalatory. It requires precise, real-time intelligence. It carries significant risk of miscalculation, and yet it remains on the table because planners believe that degrading Iran's command and control capability in the first hours of a strike is the only way to reduce the coherence and speed of Iran's retaliatory response. The logic is coldly rational. If you're going to strike, strike in a way that limits what comes back at you. Hit the facilities and hit the people coordinating the response. Buy yourself a window. The danger is that this logic, however rational in a planning document, may look to Tehran like an existential assault, not a negotiating pressure point. And a regime that believes it is fighting for survival does not negotiate. It escalates. That gap between how Washington intends the strike to be read and how Tehran will actually read it is where regional wars begin. I need you to hold that gap in your mind between intention and perception, because in the next 2 minutes, you're going to see exactly why that gap has already been measured and what Washington decided anyway. Here's the moment where the picture snaps into focus, and it's not a comfortable image. For weeks, the public framing of this situation has been the U.S. is pressuring Iran back to the negotiating table. A limited strike is leverage. Pain applied surgically to produce a deal. The bloody nose theory, of course, of diplomacy. That framing is real. It is genuinely what some factions within the U.S. national security establishment believe the strike would accomplish. But here's what the intelligence picture actually shows, and what changes everything about how you should understand this moment. Iran is currently at approximately 60% uranium enrichment. Weapons grade is 90%. The distance between 60% and 90% is technically much shorter than the distance between 20% and 60%. Iran has already crossed the hard threshold that non-proliferation experts spent a decade warning about. A strike that sets the program back, even by 2 or 3 years, does not reverse that knowledge. It does not unlearn the technical expertise Iran scientists now possess. It does not destroy the institutional capacity that survives even if the centrifuges are gone. In other words, a limited strike might delay a weapon. It cannot prevent the capability to build one. Senior U.S. officials know this. The target list reflects it. And this is the realization that reframes the entire strategic logic, because if the strike cannot achieve its stated goal of preventing Iranian nuclear weapons capability, then the actual goal must be something else. The most credible answer, emerging from analysis of force posture, timeline, and the public statements of both the U.S. president and his national security team, is this. The strike is designed not to destroy Iran's program, but to create the conditions for a deal by demonstrating that the U.S. is willing to act and that Iran's hardened sites are not as safe as Tehran believes. The Fordow facility, the one buried inside a mountain, the one Iran built specifically because it believed no Air Force could reach it, is the centerpiece of this logic. Because the U.S. now has credible capability via the B-2 GBU-57 combination to threaten even Fordow. Demonstrating that capability, actually using it, would shatter a core Iranian assumption about the limits of American military reach. That's not a bloody nose strike. That's a psychological and strategic reset delivered through 30,000 pounds of precision munitions. But here is where the twist lands. The detail that was planted earlier now pays off fully. Iran has been reinforcing those sites. The satellite images showing new concrete, new tunnel shielding, new concealment around Fordow's entrance, those aren't signs of panic. They are Iran's own strategic communication. Iran is showing the U.S. that it has seen the threat and is not deterred. It is signaling, strike us and you will not get a clean result. You will get a damaged facility, an enraged government, and a region on fire. The choice facing Washington is not strike or don't strike. It is strike and accept that the retaliation is coming on Iran's terms and timeline, or don't strike and accept that Iran continues enriching toward a weapon without consequence. There's no version of this where the U.S. acts and everything stays controlled. There's no version where the U.S. doesn't act and the nuclear program pauses. The negotiation window, 10 to 15 days, is real. But what happens at the end of that window is not a return to the status quo. It is a choice between two different kinds of instability. And the decision is being made right now in rooms where the target lists already have coordinates and the authorization channels are already warm. That's the situation as it stands today. But there's one variable nobody's pricing in correctly, is the one that determines whether a 72-hour strike becomes a 72-week war. The variable is this: the proxy network. Every analysis of a U.S.-Iran strike focuses reasonably on the direct exchange. American munitions hitting Iranian soil, Iranian missiles hitting American bases in the Gulf. But the conflict most likely to spiral out of control is not the direct one. It's the indirect one. Hezbollah in Lebanon holds a missile arsenal estimated in the tens of thousands. Iran-aligned militias in Iraq have already attacked U.S. forces dozens of times since 2023. The Houthis in Yemen, already at war with a U.S.-backed coalition, have demonstrated both the will and the capability to strike targets far beyond their immediate theater. A U.S. strike on Iran does not just activate one adversary, it activates a network, distributed, deniable, and designed to impose costs across multiple geographies simultaneously. U.S. forces in the Gulf, U.S. allies in Israel, shipping through Hormuz, diplomatic personnel across the region, all become potential targets within hours. This is what U.S. officials mean when they describe a strike as escalatory, not that Iran will respond in kind, symmetrically, to a limited operation, but that Iran's response will be deliberately asymmetric, designed to impose maximum cost, maximum disruption across the maximum number of fronts, while remaining just below the threshold that would justify a full American military campaign. Iran has studied U.S. escalation doctrine. It knows where the lines are, and it has built a retaliation architecture specifically designed to operate in the space between proportionate response and active war. That's the world a 72-hour limited strike drops the region into. Not the clean, bounded exchange that the word limited implies. A managed escalation that both sides believe they can control, right up until one miscalculation, one targeting error, one proxy action that goes further than Tehran intended, and suddenly the framework collapses. The question that remains unanswered, the one that will define the next month of global news, is whether the 10 to 15-day negotiation window produces a deal that makes all of this unnecessary. Or whether the deadline expires quietly, the order goes out, and we watch the first strikes on Iranian soil in the era of hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, and an already fractured global order. That question does not have an answer tonight, which means it has to stay with you. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of person who doesn't want the headline. You want to understand what's actually happening and why it matters. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Is a limited strike on Iran's nuclear facilities an act of strategic necessity, or is it a short-term pressure tool that trades a temporary delay for a long-term regional disaster? Drop your take in the comments. Not the hot take, the considered one. Because this is a situation where the details matter more than the slogans. And the people watching this video are exactly the audience that should be having that conversation. If this breakdown gave you something the news cycle didn't, subscribe. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because this channel covers the stories that require more than 90 seconds to understand. The next one is already being built, and it goes somewhere most outlets won't follow. One line on what's coming. There's a second country in this region quietly calculating whether the window a U.S.-Iran conflict opens is an opportunity, and the answer will surprise you. Stay informed, stay skeptical, and don't let the word limited do more work than it can carry.